Hi there, everyone, and welcome to The Daily Gardener, and thank you for listening. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling. It's July 2nd. Today we celebrate a female botanist who fought to get recognition for women by the Linnean Society. We'll also learn about the German poet who loved trees. We'll celebrate the Welsh garden maker extraordinaire, and also one of the all-time greats, a botanist from California. And we'll also honor the life of the woman known as the Bird Woman of Ellsworth. She helped us to better understand birds and their individual uniqueness. We'll celebrate the month of July with some poetry, and we grow that garden library with a book about gardening in shade. Shade gardens don't have to be dark and boring. And then we'll wrap things up with the story of an attempted murder that happened during a commemoration ceremony for one of Vienna's beloved botanists. But first, let's catch up on some greetings from gardeners around the world and today's curated news. Today's gardener greetings start with a question from Carolyn, who asked if she could transplant her Asiatic lilies after they're done blooming. Well, the answer is yes. Now, in general, I'd wait to do this until it's closer to fall. But the other thing I always like to say is that the best time to move something is when you have the time, the tools, and the energy to do so. So if that's this week, then by all means, make it happen. But just make sure to water them in well and take care of them. We're getting into the hottest time of the year, and it's tough on transplants. Next up was a picture from Sam that he sent me of his dog in his garden. He follows him all around, and he's so patient. Then finally, Deb shared a picture of a monarch caterpillar on her milkweed. Now, back home in Maple Grove, I have a bunch of milkweed, but no caterpillars yet. So, crossing my fingers. Finally, Kelly emailed to ask if we'd wish her grandmother a happy 91st birthday. She learned to garden from her grandmother. So, happy birthday, Grandma. Happy 91st. Stay healthy. Now, if you'd like to participate in the Gardener Greetings segment, just send your garden pics, stories, birthday wishes, and so forth to Jennifer at thedailygardener.org. That's thedailygardener.org. And if you'd like to listen to the podcast while you're at home, just remember you can use your smart speaker to help you with that. Just ask Alexa or Google to play the Daily Gardener podcast. Here's today's curated news. One of the sweetest stories that I recently shared I saw on Travel and Leisure, and it was the Barcelona Opera House that opened their doors and played music with a packed audience of plants. That's right, they showed the Opera House packed with plants. Every seat had a little plant that was occupying that spot. And the article said that as lockdown measures were lifted in Spain, Barcelona's Opera House played to a sold-out crowd of some very unorthodox music lovers, plants. The plants were from nearby nurseries, and after the performance, each plant was donated to a local healthcare worker in Barcelona. That's very sweet. The Opera House said in a statement that the performance was meant to give us a perspective that brings us closer to something as essential as our relationship with nature. Great idea. Now, if you'd like to read this article for yourself, you can find it in the Facebook group for the show. Just search for the word Barcelona, and this post will pop right up. Now, next up is a post that I wrote for the blog. It's called You Can't Plant Flowers If You Haven't Bought Any. Here's what it says. This clever play on words has a message that rings true. If your garden is lacking color, it's time to increase your plant diversity and go shopping. And luckily, thanks to so many nurseries, we can do that safely outside. Now, in terms of color, what gardener doesn't appreciate stunning blue blossoms? Blue is so seldom seen in the garden, which is why it's so coveted. As a new gardener, a station I held for 20 years, I could easily be persuaded to set my plant budget aside in order to buy royal blue lobelia. And if the garden center had the pale blue variety, I would buy them all, whatever they had left, and they still have my heart. As for tall blue blossoms, do you grow delphiniums in your garden? I used to start every summer by planting 20 young delphiniums in front of my porch, right under the spot where I hung the American flag. The combination of the porch with its white picket railing, the little flower garden, no edibles back then, and the flag made me feel like I was living in a Charles Wysocki print. And by the time the red lilies were popping, the delphinium would be 4 feet tall. In that same area, I had planted white astilbe and alyssum, which meant I had a little red, white, and blue garden under my American flag just in time for the 4th of July. It was a patriotic vision. Now, let me share with you some secret truths about delphinium that you may not hear from other gardeners. But these are things I've discovered about this gorgeous flower over the years. First, you need to think about delphiniums as annuals. You'd be happier if you do. For most gardeners, delphiniums are tender and finicky. My loss rate was always around 80% every spring. However, I did just read an article by a man who found some truly hardy delphinium varieties in Germany. Somehow they haven't found their way to market here, and I'm not willing to travel overseas to source my delphinium. The second truth that I've discovered about delphinium is that gardeners exaggerate about them the same way fishermen do with fish. Somehow all their delphinium are over 6 feet tall. Yeah, right. Well, I'm actually 6 feet tall, and my delphinium have never made me look up at them or even looked me in the eye. It just is not going to happen. I'm convinced of that. As I mentioned in yesterday's show, the delphinium is one of the recognized birth flowers for July. It's also known as the larkspur and the night spur. During the Victorian age, when people used flowers the way we use emojis, the delphinium symbolized lightness and an open heart. If you're a delphinium lover, it's easy to see how the happy delphinium blooms would be associated with happiness and laughter. Given the bleakness of 2020, we could probably all use more delphinium. Now, if you are a shade gardener, I want to encourage you this week to multiply your Solomon seal through division. It's so easy to divide Solomon seal, and it's simply one of the best shade plants around. All you need to do is split the large white tubers that grow underground. Make sure that each piece you divide has at least one big tuber. And if you want to plant them in drifts, yes, that's one of the best ways to plant them. Use small pieces and plant them close together instead of using one large mass. You'll have a beautiful planting of Solomon seal in no time. All right, that's it for today's gardening news. Now, if you'd like to check out my curated news articles and original blog posts for yourself, you're in luck, because I share all of it with the listener community in the free Facebook group for the show, the Daily Gardener Community. So there's no need to take notes or search for links. The next time you're on Facebook, just search for Daily Gardener Community and request to join. I'd love to meet you in the group. Here's today's brevities. On this day in 1846, the the British naturalist and women's rights activist Marian Farquharson was born. As a botanist, Farquharson had specialized in ferns and mosses, and as an activist, it took Marian and other women 4 years of petitioning the all-male Linnean Society to finally allow women. In 1904, when the issue was put to a vote, 83% of the society voted to allow women members. But then a great injustice happened. When the first 15 women were nominated to the society, Marian Farquharson was overlooked. It took 4 more years for her to be elected to the society, and it finally happened in March of 1908. This moment happened to come at a difficult time for Marian. In fact, she was too ill to attend the society's meeting to officially sign the register. 4 years later, Marian died from heart disease in Nice in 1912. And today we wish a happy heavenly birthday to Herman Hesse, who was a German poet, novelist, and painter, and he was born on this day in 1877. Hesse won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1946. Herman had a special appreciation for trees, and I thought I'd share some of his thoughtful and reverent prose with you today. Herman wrote, "Trees are sanctuaries. Whoever knows how to speak to them, whoever knows how to listen to them, can learn the truth." And he also wrote, "A tree says, a kernel is hidden in me, a spark, a thought. I am life from eternal life. The attempt and the risk that the eternal mother took with me is unique. Unique the form and veins of my skin. Unique the smallest play of leaves in my branches, and the smallest scar on my bark. I was made to form and reveal the eternal in my smallest special detail." Love that. And it was on this day in 1893 that the Welsh landscape gardener, architect, and author Ralph Hancock was born. Hancock was a garden maker extraordinaire, and he created several famous gardens across Wales, England, and the United States. One of his most famous works was the Rooftop Garden at the Rockefeller Center in New York. Hancock designed his rooftop garden in 1934, and it was cutting edge at the time. In an interview, Hancock predicted, "The days of penthouse gardening in boxes are over, and miles of roof space in every metropolis in this country remain to be reclaimed by landscape gardening." Well, it's 2020, and Hancock's vision has yet to be fully realized. There's still plenty of concrete jungle to conquer, and although the pandemic has turned more people than ever into gardeners, most rooftops go unutilized. But I have to say that it is refreshing that so many people are gardening now. Even my own mother is gardening and giddily reporting on her progress. So there's that. Now, Hancock's rooftop garden at Rockefeller Center was called the Garden of Nations, and it featured gardens for 8 different countries around a central Old English tea house and cottage garden. It was quite something to behold. To create it, Hancock needed 3,000 tons of earth, 100 tons of natural stone, and 2,000 trees and shrubs. And they all had to be hauled up there. And there's plenty of stories about how they used the service elevator in the building or a massive block and tackle pulley system that was erected on the side of the building. It truly was a Herculean effort. But he finally finished it. and Hancock's 11th floor Garden of Nations officially opened on April 15th of 1935. Nelson Rockefeller was there to see it, as well as students from Bryn Mawr College. In fact, the young women from Bryn Mawr arrived in costumes representing the various nations. In the archives, there are beautiful photos of these young women, like the one of Nancy Nickel wearing a kimono in the Japanese garden. And it was on this day in 1908 that the great woman botanist and Californian Kate Brandegee wrote to her husband Townsend, whom she lovingly called Townie. On this day in 1908, Kate was 64, and though she and Townie often botanized together, Kate was not afraid to go explore alone. And she let Townie know in this letter that, quote, "Next Monday, I am going to El Dorado County to walk from Placerville to Truckee, and I may be gone 2 weeks." Well, that would have been a 52-mile trip by foot. Kate was no slacker. Kate and Townie's love story is one of my favorites. They found each other late in life, and they made up for lost time. They were very affectionate with each other, and their botanical legacy is secure. After the San Francisco earthquake, they replaced the ruined botanical library and specimens with their own personal collection. And Kate personally mentored many young botanists, including her backfill, the impressive Alice Eastwood. And here's another story about another leading lady from the natural world. She was known as the Bird Woman of Ellsworth, Cordelia Stanwood. On this day in 1917, Cordelia went into a swamp at twilight and reported, "The black flies crawled all over my face like so many bees. I could not stand still." This was just one of many times that Cordelia would find herself in an uncomfortable position for the sake of pursuing her passion for ornithology. Her photograph of birds were handpicked by the great Edward Howe Forbush to be featured in his masterpiece, Birds of Massachusetts. In general, her bird photography was par excellence. Cordelia's 6 Little Chickadees photo is regarded as her finest piece. The photo shows 6 little chickadees separated into 2 groups of 3, and they're all sitting perched on the same little branch. Like a litter of puppies, each chickadee had its own characteristics, proving what Cordelia had already observed firsthand, that a single batch of chickadees contained many variances in the chicks in terms of size, features, etc. And finally, on this day in 2018, NASA's EcoStress birthed at the space station. EcoStress's mission was to measure the temperature of plants in space, helping researchers determine how much water plants use and how drought affects plant health. In Unearthed Words, this week we are welcoming the new month of July. Here are some poems about this hot and stormy month. This first one's from Longfellow, the American poet and educator. Then followed that beautiful season, called by pious Acadian peasants the Summer of All Saints. Filled was the air with a dreamy and magical light, and the landscape lay as if new, created in all the freshness of childhood. And here's a verse from the Scottish poet Robert Fergusson. In July month, one bonny morn, when nature's rokelay green was spread over like a rig of corn, to charm our roving evening. And finally, here's a little poem called July from the Russian poet and writer Boris Pasternak. A ghost is roaming through the building, and shadows in the attic browse, persistently intent on mischief. A goblin roams about the house. He gets into your way, he fusses. You hear his footsteps overhead. He tears the napkin off the table and creeps in slippers to the bed. With feet unwiped, he rushes headlong on gusts of draught into the hall and whirls the curtain like a dancer toward the ceiling, up the wall. Who is this silly mischief maker, this phantom and this double face? He is our guest, our summer lodger, who spends with us his holidays. Our house is taken in possession by him while he enjoys a rest. July, with summer air and thunder, he is our temporary guest. July, who scatters from his pockets the fluff of blowballs in a cloud, who enters through the open window, who chatters to himself aloud, unkempt, untidy, absent-minded, soaked through with the smell of dill and rye, with linden blossom, grass and beet leaves, the meadow-scented month, July. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, Glorious Shade by Jenny Rose Carey. This book came out in 2017 of this year, and the subtitle is Dazzling Plants, Design Ideas, and Proven Techniques for Your Shady Garden. Jenny Rose Carey is a renowned educator, historian, and author, and she's the senior director at the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society's Meadowbrook Farm in Jenkintown. In their review of this book, Gardens Illustrated said, "A practical guide to maintaining a shade garden with a useful calendar of seasonal tasks, plant directory, and inspiring design ideas." This book is 324 pages of plants, ideas, and tips, and it's all shared with today's shade gardener in mind. And I love what it says in the front flap of this book. Jenny wrote, "Most gardeners treat shade as a problem to solve. This is so true. But Jenny and many experienced shade gardeners know that shade gardens don't have to be dark and boring. In fact, once you've mastered shade gardening, you'll wonder why you ever doubted the beauty and serenity of these cool, relaxing, and colorful spaces." You can get a copy of Glorious Shade by Jenny Rose Carey and support the show using the Amazon link in today's show notes for around $8. Great book. Finally, here's something sweet to revive the little botanic spark in your heart. On this day in 1932, the Sydney Morning Herald shared a harrowing story of attempted murder at a commemoration ceremony for a botanist. It turns out a botanist named Richard Wettstein had been responsible for the botanical garden at the University of Vienna. A year after Wettstein died, the new head of Vienna University, a Dr. Abel, had just unveiled a statue of Wettstein, and he had just finished giving his speech in praise of Wettstein and all of his good deeds, when suddenly an old professor named Carl Schneider pushed through the crowd and shouted, "At last we settle an old score." Luckily, Carl's revolver shot went wide. Dr. Abel was not harmed, and neither was the statue of Wettstein. And incredibly, it was the mayor of Vienna who grabbed old Carl Schneider before he could shoot again. Now, all this excitement was a far cry from the persona of the botanist Richard Wettstein. He was known for being polite and controlled and having a courteous demeanor. And here's a little known fact about Richard Wettstein. He was an excellent speaker. On more than one occasion, the speaking skills of this Vienna botanist led him to be considered by those in powerful positions in government to be a potential contender for the President of Austria. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener, and remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day. The Daily Gardener is produced in lovely Wyoming, Minnesota with the help of Paige Mance, Brooke Bierbaum, Kiana Rayleigh, Maddie Doyle, Natalie Decker, and Eric Begay. You can find The Daily Gardener on all your favorite social media. You can follow the show on Instagram, and listeners always have a standing invitation to join the free Facebook group for the show. Just search for Daily Gardener Community the next time you're on Facebook and request to join. All the stories and books that are featured on the show can be found over at thedailygardener.org, thedailygardener.org. And while you're there, be sure to sign up for my free Friday newsletter. Last but not least, you can share your own gardener greetings on the show by emailing me at jennifer@thedailygardener.org. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling, and as always, have a great day in the garden, and we'll see you tomorrow.